Start. I think we had our reading again. So, where are we? We are on page. So these are the old ones. They are there, right? Where is our last one now? I have it really big so that old people can read it. Because we don't have any old people. We have only young people. Okay, it's on page 273. We are October 22nd, that's today, right? Christians in Public Square. Seminar on complex topics of our day. Election 2012. Nice is the President's presentation, and we can still see that when we come home. So we want to start out with the reading. We wanted to look at some models of Christians who entered the public sphere, and we had Paul. We have, in the meantime, also McGovern. My friend McGovern died a few days ago in Sioux City or whatever in South Dakota. He was here at the airport. Somebody said, Nixon will beat you up, or something like that. And he got very angry at the airport. Then we took him here to the ballroom, and I gave a speech, and he thought it was a beautiful speech. He liked my speech. So I was his campaign manager in the 3rd district. And so we had a friendship going on, and it's so sad now that he was 90. And so we had discussions about the war. During the war, he learned to hate war. That is what he said all the time. He was, I thought always he threw the bombs, but he was a pilot. And I think he flew the Liberator.
Liberator.
Mm-hmm. Liberator.
They used to build them in Michigan.
They were here in Michigan, yeah, Dearborn, they were built.
No. Willow Run.
Where is that?
That's west of Detroit.
West of Detroit.
Quite a ways.
Yeah, he changed, I think, the production of cars, and then began to produce those Liberators and the tanks too. Can you remember this?
What's that?
Yeah,
I used to see them flying over our
Oh, really?
house. They used to come us, about 4 of them.
Really?
Right over.
Oh my God!
I guess they were going to where they were.
How old were you at that time?
Oh,
10?
10 or a teenager.
Really? See, here we have an eyewitness.
Yeah.
Okay,
They
so
were
he
going
flew
to
those
Frankfurt,
things,
where they were going.
and the flak, I think, hit him twice. So he flew 2 planes which were burning, one engine out, the other one was burning, and he landed one in the Mediterranean on an island. He found that island, and another one in an airport somewhere. So he could rescue them, and he got a decoration for both. He rescued the whole crew too in the process. So, but then we had a discussion. You know, he was in Frankfurt. He bombed Frankfurt too, and I said, "You are very lucky that I wasn't there at that time. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here anymore." And so, what he thought, he did the right thing somehow. He thought, you know, the fascists had to be beaten that way, and I don't think so. I think they were beaten in Stalingrad, where I'm going now, or in Kursk or whatever. That's where we go there. It's very close by there.
Yeah.
And so,
How would they stop, even though they were beaten in Russia? They're still fighting and retaining.
I know, but I think what the bombardment does is brings people together. They like their leadership, they depend on it, so it really produces solidarity among people.
Well, they had another argument. They would keep the Eastern barbarians out of our country. This is what they thought.
Yeah, right. I mean, Catholics and liberals, particularly Catholics, to the end were with Hitler because he killed communists, you know. They thought Hitler was the only man who could overcome communism. That's why even Christians who suffered from Hitler still thought he was the man who would free them from communism. So that's why they had the Concordat. I think it was not so much a love for Hitler, it was more the fear and the hate against communism, in spite of the fact, you know, that Christians were communists themselves and all the orders were communist.
They were barbaric with the treatment of a lot of Christians.
Yeah, right.
And treatment of religion.
Well, if you listen to Katya, you know, she has another picture of that. I mean, Stalin put up the Patriarch, you know, back into Moscow again.
It's for the war, just.
Huh?
They needed him.
Oh yeah, I mean,
more.
yes, yeah. I mean, whatever the reason is, you know, they also got their icons out of the gardens again. So they wanted to do the same thing what the bourgeoisie does. They wanted to get religion behind the national cause. I think so. You know, I don't think they believed anything, but though they made an alliance with them. Okay, so nevertheless, McGovern, you know, he up to the end of his life, he was still engaged in these starvation things, hunger of the world. He founded some things, hunger here at home, and I know there was this issue with Engel something. That was his vice president. He was here too, and I went to the airport when he came, and he had treatment. He had psychological problems. He had shock therapy, and McGovern didn't know it. Then he said, "I'm 100% behind him," and then a few weeks later he fired him and put another one in. So these were, you know, some weaknesses. During the summer, suddenly the capitalists didn't pay anymore for the campaign, and so I had to collect money, $5 from the professor, 50 cents from the students, in order to pay for the television at night. Only once a week, on Friday I had some. So in the end, you know, people didn't know who McGovern was. But he had very progressive things. He wanted to pay $1,000 for every American every month as a foundation instead of all that welfare stuff. And then also national health insurance. He wanted total national health insurance. And then he reformed the whole party system in a certain way. And both parties took that over, his party reform there, to make it more you know, easier. So he did a lot of beautiful things. He was a Methodist family. His parents were Republicans. He went over to the other side. When he came home from the war, he studied for the ministry, but then changed over to history, and he was in Northwestern, where he got his degree in history. So, you know, in dark times, these people are beautiful symbols that there are good things in this country. This is very, very important. But he was a Christian, you know, and entered the public sphere continually with Christian issues, you know, Christian options, socially and also internationally. Okay, so that is one of our examples, and the other one is Bonhoeffer, whom we want to, you know, do a few things tonight, and wanted to take out a little bit time for this. So, and let me just start the last time with St. Paul, where he is still in Athens, because that was a very early entrance into the public sphere, and so we just want to look at the last things there. Where am I? That is the other John. The whole thing is a little bit bigger than the Holy Quran, so you have to find your way to it. Okay.
Ours is still in the original language.
Huh?
Ours is still in the original language. So.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. Oh, look at this. Mike is here. Wonderful. Mike, we have to make room for you. We have a round table thing here.
We all stand this way.
Okay, here are the acts. So we see, since we are the children, so what we saw is what he did. Paul vacillated. That is a good model for entering the public sphere. He has people who are not Christian. They don't even know exactly what it is. So he comes into the city. He hates the place because of all the idols. Then he makes a speech, a captatio benevolentia, and says, you are very serious about religion, which he did not mean, really. Then, after this, he builds a bridge. He says, your own poets have said so. And he presents a panentheistic position of Christianity. That means pan means all, en means the one. All is one in him. He holds it all together, and so on. And so we have these quotations. And then comes now the last thing here. God overlooked that sort of thing, that means your idolatry, and so on. So let me read the sentence before. Since we are the children of God, we have no excuse for thinking that the deity looks like anything in gold, like it's standing all in Athens. Silver and stone that has been carved and designed by a man. So this is the old prophets, that is the Abrahamic faith community who make this attack against idols. You take, the prophets say, you take a piece of wood, then you cut it in half, one thing is burned up, the other half you make a little god out of it, or fetish, which is the same thing. And so this is a critical statement. So he comes, he builds bridges, he's critical at the same time, builds bridges again, and so on. He's not thoroughly critical, he is also not an abstract type of negation. You Greeks are all stupid, you are all whatever, evil people or so, but it is also really dialectical. And the Hebrew dialectics is even sharper than the Greek dialectics. So it is going dialectical back and forth, and while he negates the idols, he also says, there is some truth in what you say. You have the truth too, to some extent. So it is not an abstract negation, but it is a concrete negation, as this is called. It's not a universal negation. All your stuff is wrong, but it's a specific thing. So your idols are gold and silver and the temples and so on, that is not right. But then you have those poets, and they talked that we are all in God, in him we live, and so on, and he is with us, and we are all his children. Okay, God overlooked that sort of thing, that means this idolatry. When men were ignorant, so that is very Greek, when you do a bad thing, you do it because you don't know. So a lack of knowledge makes things evil. Evil, the reason for evil is that people don't know, they haven't studied. But now he is telling everyone, everywhere, that they must repent. So here's the issue of repentance, which Jesus had very strong. He would say, the man of Sodom will have it good on judgment day in comparison to the men of Sidon, because the men of Sidon do not repent. Now, that the men of Sodom have really repented, that is not written anywhere. Jesus was so nice that he thought maybe they had repented. But the burning and the earthquake came so fast that the 5 cities, were just overwhelmed by it, and they probably didn't even have any time to repent. But repentance is at the core. It means transformation. It means evolution. It means learning. So that is and for individuals and whole groups. Because he has fixed a day when the whole world will be judged. So that's the judgment idea. We have it in Islam, we have it in Christianity, we have it in Judaism, and we have it in many other religions as well. So that they must repent. By the way, we don't know enough for other religion. I gave Father Ken, I gave him my first book, and then I gave him the second book. And I said, of course, you haven't read the first one. I said, I'm writing faster than you can read. But then on the second book, there was the Trimurti, the Trinity of the Hindus. And I said, look, that is a predecessor of your Trinity. And I said, well, they came later. No, I said, they were hundreds of years earlier than you were, but they didn't fix it, right? The third person, there's something wrong with the third person. So that should have consoled him. So I don't know what happened. But, I think all the priests should be educated in departments of comparative religion, that they know, what the others are saying. So, the Trinity, we have it in Taoism, we have the Trinity, we have the Trinity in Hinduism, we have the Trinity in the Neoplatonists in Alexandria, and from there they got into the New Testament, and that is how we got the doctrine of the Trinity. And some of the Christians have become Unitarians on the other side of the highway, but others still have the Trinity, but they don't know what to do about it. So on Trinity Sunday, they usually preach on celibacy or whatever, which has absolutely nothing to do with the Trinity, because they don't know. And then they say a mystery or whatever. But it is one of the greatest accomplishments of the philosophy of history of philosophy, and also history of religion. So they don't even know what good things they have. And why in this country, why the Trinity, cannot be understood, is that the level on which we are operating is analytical understanding. And we had made it, but we fell back again, the Great Depression, from dialectical reason. This Trinitarian thinking happens on the level of reason, and we have just an analytical understanding, which divide things. Like children, when they want to know something, they take it apart. And so we take everything apart, and then we don't know how to get it together again. So, and of course, the third estate, gained the victory here, power over everything else. And these were tool makers. They were shoemakers. They were bakers. That means people with instrumental rationality. And so this is what the whole country has become. Because of the tremendous dimensions, we needed railroads and roads and cars and all that. So our whole soul went into that. And from this level of instrumental analytic understanding, the Trinity thinking, dialectical thinking, is very hard to get to. And that means that we cannot see contradictions, like in the speech, the last presidential thing, the second one, where Romney suddenly in the end, I don't know what happened to him, but he said, it's not the task of the government to create jobs. Thereby he undid everything what he had done in the 90 minutes before, where he had blamed the president not to have created jobs. So he blamed the government that it didn't create jobs. Then he himself promised that if he is the government, he will create 12 million jobs, and did not notice it, nor did the pundits, nor did the president, because there he could have got him, He said, you just undid the whole shit which you just said, But he didn't. He didn't, And the pundits, on both sides, on the right and the left, didn't do it neither. And the president did something similar. After he, looked at all the difficulties and what he has not resolved and so on, he sings a praise to the free enterprise system and the entrepreneur and so on, which produced all the problems which he solved and did not solve, So both sides, that is, the whole country is that way. And we had, up to the Great Depression, people, these high schools were Hegelian in Philadelphia and left wing and St. Louis right wing and so on. So they did have it. But then we thought if you look at contradictions, you destabilize things once more. They are already economically destabilized. Then you destabilize them on top, by this dialectical thinking. Suddenly you see Kalamazoo, on one side there is the slums there, on the other side there are people with $2 or $3 million homes which need police protection and so on. And so you cannot, if you think dialectically, you see both at the same time. So nobody here can write a dissertation. I just had 2 doctoral dissertations, one in political science and one in sociology. You can write a dissertation on the north side. And then you can write another dissertation on the which we don't have any upper class here. We only have low middle class. So, but they have a good life, and you can write about their wives in the swimming pool and so on. But you cannot write about both of them at the same time, namely that the wealth is inherited because the poverty is inherited on the other side too, and why even no matter how rich civil society becomes, they never can solve the poverty problem. So because the surplus value moves continually from one side to the other, and therefore you have the inheritance of wealth on one side and of poverty on the other side. So since we want to freeze that, we don't want to change that really. That's the whole thing of I wrote this today. The whole thing of equality. It's not an equal society, of course. The class system means inequality, and we may pay lip service on the left of liberalism that we want to have equality, but we never had it, and we will never have it as long as this system lasts. And there's this whole tragedy, fascism. I came to this country with the fear that what happened in Europe could happen here too. That means the change over from liberalism to fascism. And that is always possible. Liberals and fascists and Catholics all hate socialism, of course. And socialism stands for equality, and they inherit it from Judaism and from Christianity, and then also from Islam. And so Hitler called the communists the illegitimate children of Christianity and Judaism. And Rome, according to that interpretation, was not even alone. The Christians and the Jews were the Bolshevists of the Roman Empire and destroyed it. And the Bolshevists, whom he wanted to conquer, and he killed 27 million of them, if they would not be overcome, they would destroy the whole human species, because the human species has to be unequal. It is called the very positivistic, very naturalistic, aristocratic law of nature, the right of the predator over the prey. And so Hitler, as a positivist, said this is the case, that is how nature is, that's how history must be. So I want to make sure that I and my country and my race will not be the predator, will not be the prey, but will be the predator. And the God concept, his religion, he was a Catholic originally, but left it, not externally. He paid tax, church tax, to the end of his life. And his sister always said that he never left the church, but by his thinking, he definitely left the church. that the God is identical with this. That means the creator God whom he appeals to. What he calls the faith is the creator God. The first person is the Trinity. So you have the divinity, the Godhead, and then the Godhead has three components. And the first component is that creator God who is responsible for nature and history and so on. And this God, he is on the side of the predator, not the side of the prey. And if an individual is weak or a whole nation is weak, then God punishes them for their weakness. And he interpreted the German defeat that they were not strong enough to stand up and so on. To the British had their empire, and they had India for a colony. We had Central America, South America, the Philippines as a colony, and the British, and they had the colonies in Africa and so on. And the Germans showed themselves to be weak, and therefore they deserved the defeat. But then he gave them a second chance. He gave them that leadership, and the main thing was, its main plan was to go into the Soviet Union and take this all as colonial territory from Kiev to St. Petersburg, Petrograd at that time, Leningrad, and up to the Ural at least. So I don't think he was interested in the Asian part, which is a large part of Russia. So, and then when Stalingrad came, and he saw that this was the greatest defeat which ever any army had suffered. So on one side, General Paulus, a positivist, like our Westmoreland there in Vietnam, and on the other side, an extremely gifted dialectician, General Zhukov, and he encircled him. 1 million men were encircled, what a huge army, and could not break out, and nobody could break in. All attempts were made. Something similar had happened in Moscow before during the winter, and Hitler was confused. When you look at the maps today, you'd see before Moscow, the German general got a heart attack. Then Hitler took over himself, and he moved suddenly the troops from Moscow toward Kiev. Then he sent them all back to Kiev. So the dialectician over there on the other side confused him completely. He took troops to Stalingrad, then he took the troops away from Stalingrad and marched into Central Asia, into the Caucasus, in order to get the oil wells. And when he came there, the oil wells were burning. So then he trooped all the troops back again. I mean, these were hundreds of miles to move people who were not very movable. They still had horses, and trucks were there to transport the gasoline, and so on. The logistic problem was unbelievable. So, but the confusion of the positivistic side comes from that, because you don't know what the hell the other guy's doing. So he suddenly withdraws, because from the experience and his theory, he goes back, he interprets things newly, changes the theory, and with a new theory, he makes a new attack. And then suddenly he disappears again, and the same thing happens again. So Westmoreland said, you know, we have defeated them, they all have withdrawn, bong, comes the Tet Offensive, you know. Suddenly they all disappear again, and then suddenly they stand in the middle of Saigon, and we have to beg them to let us go out at the last moment, you know, to take our troops out and so on. So the same thing, the Bad generals were also educated in the Zhukov tradition, and they did the same things. If we could have broken it, if we had legitimized them in Iraq, you know, and they would have stayed in power, we would have had continuity, and we would have law and order. Instead of that, we delegitimated them. We sent them all home and so on, and they had all their weapons. They never resisted, really. They had all the weapons in the desert, and then they made all these attacks, and that goes still on today against the government. So that is dialectical warfare, dialectical thinking, and we paid a high price for this. But Paul has it here, right? So his movements are tremendously dialectical, in the sense no, negation, and then positive again, and then another negation, and the whole Greek world, you know, is rejected because of its idolatry, but then not all is rejected because there are good things there. Their philosophers have come close to the truth, the theon agnoton, the unknown God, but then they don't know who he is. So he brings them now the knowledge who he is really. And we call that a cataphatic tradition. A cataphatic God is the God who reveals himself as the creator God, but it is also apophatic because he reveals himself but remains hidden at the same time, which people experience when they have theodicy experiences, you know. Like yesterday we celebrated remember the death of my wife, Margie, and Mike still knew her. You knew her still, did you? Yeah, you did. So which remains, that such a catastrophe happens, a good woman with 8 children and so on, and then just disappeared and so on. So then God is hidden. People don't know, who or what God wants or what the sense or meaning or whatever is. So that is this double. And in Christianity, again, dialectically, you have both of them together. God has revealed himself, and at the same time, he remains hidden. Okay, so that is the background, and now he says there you have, you did the wrong thing, but God, he has somehow overlooked those things. So it's not, doomsday, you will be punished for all your gods or whatever, but it is rather, you didn't get it right, But now if you repent that what you have done, that you went the wrong way, then things will be okay. Because he has fixed the day when the whole world will be judged, and judged in righteousness, and he has appointed a man, and now this man is Jesus, and it's not God, not the God-man or whatever. That's very important. That's an earlier stage in which the whole Trinity idea had not yet developed. The Trinity idea was done, first of all, in order to build a bridge between Jewish monotheism and Greek polytheism. And it was also an attempt to integrate Jesus, after he became higher and higher, into the strict Jewish monotheism, where, according to Islam, also no addition is allowed, and now it looked as if the Christians made an addition. And the Trinity construct is an attempt to integrate the Jesus into the strict monotheism, which was difficult from the very beginning, because the high priest already said Jesus was a blasphemer, blasphemy, because he put himself too close to the Father. He showed some intimacy, or some mystical intimacy, to the Father. So nevertheless, it's a man. It's not a God-man. And the Messiah in Judaism and in Islam is a man. It's not a God-man or whatever. So in Iran, the government is very eschatological. After Ali comes and chaos and so on, then the Messiah will come. And that Messiah is the Jesus Messiah. And that Jesus Messiah is a man. Like very often David is the predecessor or is the model for it. So David is very much idealized, all the rotten things he did as a king are forgotten, so, as it happened in all world religions. Appointed a man to be judge, and God has publicly proved this by raising this man from the dead. So it's not Jesus, it's not the God-man who rises himself, but God has brought him back, has resurrected him. A man resurrected him. And then the psalm says, to the right side of the Father, and the psalm was taken over. So, but this is strictly in the Pharisaic tradition. So when the year 70, the Romans marched through Lebanon and conquered the country, and then conquered Jerusalem, and then also burned the temple, but not accidentally only. They did not want to burn. They never burned temples. They took half of the gods from Gallia, Germania, and so on, took them into the Pantheon in Rome, which is still there. We can visit it. And there they put all the gods together, and priests daily, put holy smoke up and sacrifice to them. It was a religion of utility, like the American religion. We are very close to the Romans, not to the Greeks. So that means, what is it called, rational choice theory, what do you get out of it? You give something to the god, and then you want to get something back from the god. It's some kind of a cow religion. You think that God can be milked, and you have milk and cheese and profit from him, and so on. The Romans were that way. They took all the gods together, sacrificed them, and then they hoped that the gods will bless Rome, and that Rome will, win all the battles, and so on. And then, of course, if the battles are lost, and you have inflation, depression, and so on, then what's wrong? Didn't we sacrifice enough? Or you blame somebody, like the Jews and the Christians. That's what St. Augustine then defended the Christians, because the Romans said, because you're damned creatures, because of your atheism, you don't sacrifice to the gods, and then therefore also high treason, because if you don't sacrifice, then the gods do not care for the state, and then we have that misery. And Augustine spends whole books there for defending the Christians by saying, you had inflations before there was Christianity. You had defeats before Christianity. It cannot be our fault, because it was there before. And Augustine was a genius, except his sex life was all messed up. And that has a horrible consequences for Christian sexual morality up to the day. It's a horrible thing. So nevertheless, that is a theory of the Pharisees, and Paul had studied under Gamaliel, a great lawyer and theologian in Jerusalem, and so he was a real archetype of a Pharisee. With the fall of Jerusalem and with the accidental burning of the temple, priesthood disappeared and the Sadducees disappeared. The Sadduceic priesthood, which sentenced Jesus, they disappeared 40 years after his death. And so the temple disappeared, but the Pharisees remained, the Pharisaic rabbis, and Jesus was very close to the Pharisaic rabbis. And about 200 years before Jesus' arrival, they developed their theory in their struggle with the Greeks, where they had huge casualties, that people would not only get into some kind of a Hades, into a dark place where good and evil are all the same shadows and so on, but the ideas of the resurrection of the flesh, the idea of the resurrection of the flesh came up, and Paul has this idea. He says later on in the letter to the Romans, if this teaching of the resurrection of the flesh is not true, then Jesus was not resurrected. And when Jesus was not resurrected, then we Christians are the most miserable people, because we will not enjoy this life fully, and there is no other. So Paul puts it all on that one point, on this Pharisaic teaching that the resurrection of the flesh can really happen. And that is what he refers here to. And the idea was not completely strange. There were Greek religions which believed that there would be a judgment day. At this moment, at this mention of rising from the dead, some of them burst out laughing. Now, this can happen to you when you go into the public sphere. They may laugh about you, right? Because the public sphere is populated by people who may still be Christians, but just formally, or in terms of the American civil religion. We are supposed to be religious, but not too religious, because then it becomes really disturbing. And then there are people who emphasize self-determination to such an extent that there is no objective side to anymore. So if you would go into the public sphere here at that time, if he would have met, instead of Epicureans and Stoics, he would have met some Aristotelians or some Platonists, then he would have had some kind of a objective rationality. That means the Creator God created the world rationally. So there's not only the subjective reason of people, which the Stoics and the Epicureans also emphasized. That model is very good for us, because our public sphere is full of Stoics and Epicureans, In a certain sense, the man we govern, had some Stoic in him, and there were some senators in the past who were very Stoic in their attitude. Stoicism and Epicureanism happens after the system has collapsed, and after there is nothing objective anymore in terms of a world of gods, or so. They have already been ridiculed by poets and so on. So the state mythology has collapsed, and people withdraw to their own bodies, into their own subjectivity, into private right, into property, their gardens and their contracts, and that is where it all stops. Because the sphere of civil society and of the state and of history and so on has become so chaotic that they cannot find a way anymore. They're disappointed about it. They're alienated from it. That's why they withdraw to their bodies. Turn on the television tonight, how many times they talk about the body. Food, food, food. Then diet, 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 against the damn food which they just have propagated there. And then the medicine, because they got sick from all that, either from the diet or from the food. And so there you have all the food cuisines from all kinds of countries. Then you have all the diets there to get rid of that damn food. Then you have all the medicine because of all the illnesses, diabetes, which you got because of too much food, and so on and so on. So, and then when you think of clothing on top of it, to hide the body or to hide it halfway, because you make it quite interesting when it's only half hidden. If it's completely naked, it's somewhat boring, but if it's a little bikini or so, that makes it beautiful. I had my lawyer, I met him on Sunday, And he said, I had such a beautiful experience. I saw a woman with beautiful legs. As a matter of fact, I went outside and said, you have such beautiful legs. You are a proof of God's existence. His father was a professor of philosophy in Nazareth College, and he always, went through the proofs of God, which have been destroyed by Immanuel Kant, but he still taught them. Nazareth College, he could teach whatever. He did this for 50 years. Girls on top of it, to girls he taught it.
Aquinas?
So,
He taught Aquinas?
He taught Aquinas is, proofs of God. All the cosmological ones and all the teleological ones, and then the ontological ones, which Catholicism doesn't really accept, in spite of the fact that it's the basis for the two others. So heaven knows what he taught. But his son, at least, he got that, and he had difficulties and didn't know exactly, if one could still do that. But there he saw this beautiful woman with these beautiful legs, and I'm just thinking, which proof it could have been. It must have been the teleological proof, maybe also the cosmological proof. It could not be the ontological one. He didn't start with the idea, but he started with the legs. So that must be cosmological or teleological, the purposiveness of the legs. And so that was McMorrow, yeah. You know McMorrow, huh?
Well, I knew that the father was a professor.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, the father was very good. He stood up for social justice in the city. I heard many times when he got in public meetings. I mean, he was a guy entering the public sphere, and bravely stood up for questions of social justice and so on. And he had a drinking problem on top of it, and then he became blind in the end, and I gave him a student who made some money by reading to him, so that he had, he wanted to learn and learn up to the end of his life. He had been a seminarian, and then got married, and I think then he spent his life, as a professor there in King College, in Nazareth College. So, and I think he sent all his children. They all became lawyers, or most of them, and maybe one teaches law or whatever. So, and then they are related to farm families around here. They have huge farms. They know the fruit tree farms and so on, and have all that slave labor from Mexico, and got very rich by it. So I took one of their daughters along once to Dubrovnik, I think, together with Karen. Okay, so that is the issue here. Would like to hear. So the laughter, right? The issue, and the laughter is the following one. In antiquity, Paul can still think that not all will be Epicureans, in such enjoyment and so on. That would all be Stoics, but that there are still Aristotelians and Platonists around, and they had still objective things. It's so hard to explain because for us this objective side has disappeared. And for all the culture war issues, in one of the doctoral exams we discussed that really, it is so important, that there is still something objective. Because self-determination, but according to what? So the choice, choice option, and pro-life option, and so on. The pro-choice option says the woman has self-determination. She can determine, what happens to her body, and so on. And that's one side. That is true enough, right? But then the question is, according to what? Is there? Where does the norm come from? And then the norm has to be invented by the same people who want to determine themselves, and then it becomes all very arbitrary. On the other hand, the pro-life people, they do still have, some objective thing. So where there is God's reason is at work, and therefore everything is purposeful, and therefore sexuality has also a purpose, and it's the purpose in all living organisms, because they're all dying, therefore they have to reproduce themselves. For Jesus, nobody marries in the kingdom anymore because there will be no death anymore. But wherever there is death, you have to have marriage. You have to reproduce yourself, at least normally. So that is the connection between that. And so the pro-life people and all the other problems, stem cell research and abortion and so on, everywhere there is, and birth control and so on, everywhere it is this objective rationality. So we have the absolute rationality of God, God's logic, and God's logic is at work in nature, and it is at work in the world of man. So therefore you have to self-determine, but you are supposed to determine yourself in terms of these objective standards. So they can either come from God, or they come from nature, or from God through nature, or whatever. But there is something other than our own subjectivity, or our own morality, or our own self-determination. That is in all the culture war issues there. And when a Christian enters the public sphere and he presupposes that there is such an objective thing, they may not laugh at him, but it sounds as if he came from the Middle Ages, or it sounds as if he came from antiquity. And modernity means self-determination without this objective rationality. So the absolute rationality of God has disappeared. Also, God is dead, and so on. Then also, therefore, the objective rationality in nature and so on has also disappeared. And so the human subject is thrown back on himself, like existentialism, Jean-Paul Sartre, and so on. We are free we are not free not to be free, or so. That means we have to be free. We have to determine ourselves in one way or the other. We invent our own essences, so to speak. One says, I want to become a nun, the other one says, I want to become a teacher, and so on. So we make up our own essences. There is no objective hierarchy that one is higher than the other, or what. We make everything up, and the sociologists call that construction. We are constructing, and it drives me nuts sometimes, because obviously we're not constructing everything. I'm not constructing the law of gravity. If I just jump from the roof, I will find out that the law of gravity is very powerful, if I have constructed it or not, or whatever. So, but it has been gone so far to one side that the other side has disappeared completely, and that produces the unbelievable confusion in the public sphere. And if somebody comes like St. Paul, who has this objective thing still, or anybody from the Middle Ages or whatever, or still a Hegelian, that would be the last time, 1830 or so, that there was still an objective side of sharing, and then it breaks down. Then we have the same situation which we had Paul in late antiquity, where the objective side has disappeared for people and they are thrown back. Socrates was already a reaction. Socrates wanted to give people who had lost their objective hold, that is the purpose which the gods have set up, that was all ridiculous, and he found the daimonion inside, the conscience. And the Athenian court thought that he had introduced a new god, which was against the Athenian law, and therefore he was sentenced to death. And another one was that he seduced youngsters. He was a homosexual. He was a bisexual guy. He had 2 children, and he had Siebert as his boyfriend there. But like all the Romans, if we discuss that, homosexual unions or so, that's very important, for the Greeks. Homosexuality was a medium to reach the realm of the ideas, which is in God. Augustine would put it into God, and the ideas. And so in order to lift yourself up to the idea of beauty in its purity and its eternity, you had to start out with immediate bodies who were beautiful. And the Greeks could not see the beauty of women. The Spartans and the Athenians, they took bath nakedly, and both genders were swimming together. So they were very open. That is why Hitler and other people think, that the greatest catastrophe which happened to humankind was Christianity, And they suddenly had to put all kinds of stuff on and became anxious about their own bodies and all that thing, because the Greeks had a very open thing to it. So nevertheless, this, as far as, where am I now? So let me go back to this about ridiculous there. Socrates had replaced this objective world by internal world, by the daimonion, by conscience. So Socrates and Jesus are the inventors of conscience. When the objective world was some shaky or perverted, Jesus came at the very end of the Jewish state, and there was a lot of hypocrisy around. They didn't really believe what they said, and so on. There were empty graves, and Jesus shouts at them all the time. That means the Jewish objective side of the world, the will of God and all that, had become rather spooky. And so both of them give men then a hold in themselves. So but the question is, if we are ridiculed, if we go in the public sphere, and one has to be careful, of course. So one has to know who one is when one enters the public sphere. That most of the people there are concerned with self-determination in the economy, economic self-determination, and political self-determination. And these two are connected with each other continually. See, if you, for instance, have a gender problem and say women should have equal rights in the labor market, you right away, have not only a gender problem, you have an economic problem. If you would pay women equal to men, you would have billions of dollars flowing into the economy, because these women would not go offshore or whatever, or to China or whatever. They would spend it here in this country, and that would, of course, create jobs. So everything is interconnected. The economic self-determination and the political self-determination hang together in every culture war issue which comes up every day. It's just to find out, what the interconnection is. So in order to avoid this thing, you would have to start, dialectically like Paul, and honor that this is what we are as modern people. As modern people, we are concerned with our own self-determination. And we want to have institutions which allow us this self-determination. That is something which, in the what is it called, the Tea Party, people, they are afraid of alternative future number one, the totally administered society, which would curb their self-determination. Suddenly the state from which they are alienated would make medical decisions and so on. They want to determine that themselves. That is a modern person, and there's nothing wrong why one should not, whenever one enters the public sphere, one should start with this, because that is itself something which goes back to Socrates and goes back to Christianity itself. So the question is, the problem is, if you have a position on any of these culture war issues, if there is something objective, if you can see that is, what nature wants, or that is what God wants, and so on, that is where the danger of becoming ridiculous. So if you go to Bill Maher, he will ridicule this right away, and he will laugh you out of the court, and so on, if you go into his public sphere. So that is the question, right? One knows how to start. If you say, the women have a right to self-determination, the workers have a right to self-determination. The issue number 2 then in the next election there about securing bargaining rights for the working men and so on, that sounds modern, at least, that will not be ridiculous. And people will be against it, because they think then the price of labor goes up and the profit goes down and so on and so on. But it will not sound ridiculous. But as soon as you go, and you say masturbation and homosexuality and stem cell research and so on, they all violate an objective purposiveness teleology in the human body or in the family or so, then that is where, where they are tempted to laugh, because it is foreign to modern people.